Welcome everybody, and firstly a massive thank you for taking part and taking the time to join myself, Chloe and our field researchers here at ISC today. We were delighted with the number of you that have taken up this rare opportunity to glean the insights and intelligence from our expert field consultants, and your questions have been invaluable in making this happen today. So again, many thanks for taking part. We did receive a very large number of questions and we wanted to cover as much as possible in the session today. It is scheduled for 45 minutes, as you all know, but we are likely to run over by about 10 minutes. So we hope that you can join us for the full session. However, it is being recorded and a link of this will be sent on directly via email to anyone that has registered after the event. Due to the valuable nature of the content, we will also be making the webinar available through the outreach portal. And again, we'll let everyone know where this can be found once it becomes available and uploaded. Now, if we have not been able to cover your specific question within the session, then please be assured that Chloe or I will make sure that we follow up with you separately as soon as possible after the webinar has taken place.
So before we dive into the questions themselves, just a very quick reminder on the role of which the field researchers play here at ISC. And quite simply, it's massive. The field researchers are located around the globe in the main areas of growth for the international schools. They're responsible for carrying out one-to-one interviews with the heads from the leading international schools within their territories. And as you can imagine, they capture a huge amount of information, not only on the individual school itself, but also the wider market and that it's within. They have over time built up a level of trust and a good relationship with many of the heads that they visit. So I am just going to unshare the screen so we can reveal everybody. So just bear with me. And we can get started. So joining us today on the panel, we have Nalini, who is the head of the field research team and also covers EMEA. Pia, who focuses on Eastern Asia. Janelle, looking after Southeast Asia. And Abhishek, who concentrates on Southern Asia. So without further ado, let's get going with the questions. A bit further into the webinar, the questions will be focused on specific subject areas, but to start us off, we're going to cover a few of the more generic questions that came in. So starting with Nalini, one of the questions that came up was, did schools truly learn from the pandemic and adjust accordingly, or are most just trying to get back to the old normal?
That's such a good question. The pandemic certainly made everybody stop and take stock, certainly after the initial crisis phase. And many then acted upon, I think, Churchill's famous phrase, which is never let a crisis go to waste. That initial reaction means that most schools now have an online education plan in place that can be implemented with little to no notice if necessary. But since then, lots of schools have used the experience to assess what is useful, what students need, and what they need to do to deliver that. There's definitely a focus on face-to-face interactions and ensuring things like fine and gross motor skills and social skills are up to scratch, as quite a lot of gaps were identified here once learning returned to an in-person format. But there's also an incorporation of things that worked well during the pandemic, such as online parent meetings, using technology to support learning and assessment, and to perhaps broaden the offerings available. I think finally it's safe to say that schools have become much more aware of their stakeholders' mental health and well-being, and that's a new focus post-pandemic.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Nalini. The next question is, what do you see as the biggest classroom challenges international schools are currently facing? And Janelle, I wondered if you could answer this one for us.
Sure, Chloe, and hello, everyone. Let me answer these questions in two ways, per region or per country and in general. Let me start with the general first. So in general, me and my colleagues have been hearing about teacher recruitment challenges. For some countries, for instance, like Cambodia, hiring of qualified expatriate teachers. So there's also so many ways that schools are addressing this, from training of local teachers to be qualified to teach in international school setting, to giving incentives for specialists, expatriates in their own fields to get teacher qualifications. If I will share some challenges in certain countries or regions, let me start with Southeast Asia first, which I handle. In Southeast Asia, some schools have mentioned about bridging the learning gap or skills that have been affected during the pandemic. Aside from that, since technology and AI is a focus, schools have to adapt and also set limitations on the use of these new technologies. SEN and EAL provisions are also other areas that will need to develop with the rise of diverse learners in Southeast Asia, and I think globally. In the Middle East, particularly in Bahrain and Oman, schools are putting efforts in improving the English and math programs for students. They have been seeing that differentiation and increasing EAL needs are both challenging and require greater resourcing and training. Similarly, in East Asia, differentiation and increasing EAL needs, especially as student bodies are becoming more and more local, are challenges that have also been mentioned. In Africa, particularly in Nigeria, similar to concerns on technology in Southeast Asia, teachers are facing challenges in equipping technological skills. Lastly, for South Asia, particularly in India, there is the three-language policy that affects the subject time for other core subjects.
Lovely, that's great. Thanks, Janelle. A client has also asked, what is the emphasis schools put on global citizenship? And Pia, I wonder if we could come over to you for this one, please.
Of course. Thank you so much, Chloe, for that question, and hello to everybody. So global citizenship is this much used phrase in marketing materials of international schools, but their actual emphasis on global citizenship varies quite a bit. So you have some schools that see it as a buzz phrase, because we're an international school, we are, global citizenship is already embedded by default, by virtue of us being an international schools. Whereas for many other international schools, they don't take this as a given. And instead, they look at global citizenship in tandem with community or service learning programs, which many schools are looking to restart now that they're back to face-to-face learning, or in tandem with various initiatives involving DEIJ and sustainability, which encourage students to look outside of themselves and really understand and recognize the role that they play as citizens of the world.
That's great. Thank you, Pia. Special needs continues to be a very important focus to many, and a question that's been put forward to ask, what are the main growth areas in terms of special needs? And Abhishek, I wonder if you could give your feedback here.
Sure. Thank you, Chloe, and hello to everyone. Welcome for this. So I will be using SEN to refer special education need for this answer. So globally, there is a lack of trained SEN specialist teachers and support staff, alongside slow diagnosis for SEN in many countries that has been observed here. So this is often due to the lack of access to relevant professionals because of lack of availability of these trained staff, cost, or culture barriers. Like these are most of the common responses that we got. Now, in many countries, international schools cater for children with SEN in a way that local schools do not, and leading to a possibility of higher presence of children with SEN in international schools. For example, in Singapore, locals are typically not allowed to attend international schools. However, some children with special education need and well-being needs are being allowed to do so, but with the permission from Ministry of Education. Thanks. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Abhishek. So back over to you now, Janelle. Please, could you give your thoughts on whether you have any specific advice, tactics, or comments on how to market to groups of schools?
We're in research. So I think first, research is very important when marketing to groups. It will be helpful to know needs of their individual schools, the central budget, or even the individual school's budget. School groups usually want to leverage their buying power to obtain better pricing structures. Products and resources generally need to be something that every school in their group can use, regardless of location, curricula, or fee point, and something that they could do more affordably, or something that will better address their needs in-house. Second is knowing who to approach or who is in charge of the decision making for purchases is also an advantage when marketing to groups. Also, since groups have central and individual school budgets, as I have mentioned, marketing to schools that are under education groups could also be very helpful, because once you get their interest from these individual schools and they're happy with the product and services, they can recommend it to other heads that are part of the group or even to their headquarters as well.
Lovely. Thanks, Janelle. So I'll hand over now to Emma, who's going to look at the questions relating to teacher recruitment and CPD.
Thanks, Chloe. Yeah, there was a really strong interest in this area, so we're going to try and cover as much as we can for this for you. So first question then. So how has the teacher shortage affected teacher recruitment globally? What areas have been most affected by a reduction of educators willing to relocate and travel following the pandemic? So Pia, I wonder if you could answer this one for us, please.
Of course, and that's a very rich question that they've posed, Emma, because with the global teacher shortage, it's become more apparent the difference between a more desirable teaching destination and I guess a less desirable one. Just in broad strokes, on the one hand, you have most of Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, which continue to be seen as desirable international teaching destinations. So Southeast Asia, for example, is seen as having relatively manageable costs of living and offering good opportunities for travel, while the Middle East is often viewed positively through the sun, sand, and tax-free income lens. So it's all happy days on the one hand. But on the other hand, you have markets in Africa and East Asia that are facing significant challenges. In Africa, for example, schools in Ghana have to deal with a cap for expatriate hires, while schools in Egypt have to deal with a very dramatic devaluation of its local currency against the US dollar. Meanwhile, in East Asia, the extended border closures and strict COVID-19 measures in mainland China and Hong Kong, plus all the negative press in the West around China, these continue to put teachers off these markets. And school leaders expect that it will take a while for mainland China and Hong Kong to rehabilitate their image overseas. Actually, one school leader said that it's like, these countries have a stink or a bad smell, and it's going to take them a while to shake off that bad smell so that foreign teachers would come back and see them as desirable teaching destinations once again.
Thanks, Pia. Lots of really good, great information in there. So what does research indicate in terms of the future of job fairs being virtual versus in person? And Nalini, I wonder if you could offer some advice here, please.
I think from our research, we've definitely got two distinct camps on this. There's an increasing number of schools this year who are either not returning to face-to-face recruitment because they prefer the ease, perhaps the affordability of online recruitment. And then you've got those who have returned to face-to-face recruitment fairs this academic year and who find them particularly helpful because it allows them to show applicants what it is that their schools offer, what's attractive in their schools that applicants might not otherwise know. At the moment, it seems like there are quite a few undecided people who are on the cusp of choosing one way or another, having experienced perhaps a little bit of both methods over the last 3 or 4 years. But it's no longer, I don't think, a given that schools will attend face-to-face fairs as it often was pre-pandemic, with some schools reporting that they found the quantity and quality of candidates lacking this academic year, and so they don't intend to return to face-to-face recruitment fairs next year. So it's an interesting one, a bit of a wait and watch.
Thank you. Abhishek, maybe we could come to you and ask if you and the team are seeing any changes in how international schools are using training and development to support with recruitment. Would you be able to take that one for us, Abhishek?
We might have
Sure, yeah.
lost
So
you.
yes,
Oh,
yeah, sorry. I'm sorry for
Okay,
that. So
no
yeah,
problem.
is there, yeah. Yeah, yes, there are some noticeable changes occurring in that space. For instance, some schools in India have their own training academies where they train their teachers and then they put them on the payroll or the subjects that they want to teach.
Oh, I think,
However, a few schools mentioned that they are partnering with this school's training academies to train their teacher because of limited resources. Hello, can you hear me?
yeah, it's a little bit, I think we're losing signal with
Yeah,
you a little bit there, Abhishek. So I wonder, just for so that everybody could hear, Nalini, I wonder if maybe you could just give the feedback on that, just so that people do get the clear message, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got
Thanks.
Abhishek's notes here in front of me.
Thank
So
you.
there's definitely been some changes in how schools are using training and development. He was giving an example of some schools in India who have arranged their own training academies where they train their teachers. And I'm certainly aware of that going on in different places around the world as well. A few schools mentioned that they're partnering with these schools' training academies to train their teachers because of their own limited resources. And obviously these academies have bigger and better facilities for training newly recruited staff. We're seeing that really in pockets around the world. There's a trend observed in East and Southeast Asia, for example, of this going on at the Harrow schools. But on the other hand, there are some challenges around this teacher recruitment. And a few schools have talked about being open to teachers who perhaps don't have experience in the programs that they offer. Usually it's the IB. It can be very challenging to get teachers for the IB. And so they're using training and development, that professional development, as a way to attract teachers by training them up in that curriculum.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We will try and return to you, Abhishek, and hopefully technology will play along. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. But thank you.
Yeah.
Pia, I wonder if you could share your thoughts on what you would consider to be the most interesting current trend in recruitment and CPD within the international schools at the moment.
I actually agree with a lot of what Nalini and Abhishek have already outlined for us earlier. And I think two trends that maybe won't be highlighted elsewhere in today's discussion are, number one, we're seeing more teachers seeking higher degrees than previously, particularly research-based master's and doctorate programs. And number two, we're also seeing a great increase in interest in peer-to-peer professional development. So international schools are saying, we're hiring these great teachers, so why not leverage their knowledge, their skills, and their experiences to benefit other teachers in our community? So I think, Emma, those are two interesting trends that we're seeing in the market.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, a question was asked about how important professional development is currently. So in your opinion, would you say this is more or less important than in previous years? And what are the main focus areas for training in international schools at the moment? Janelle, I wonder if you could take that one for us, please.
Sure, Emma. It remains important. And after a couple of years where schools were very focused on upskilling teachers in technology, we are now seeing more personalized needs-specific PDs emerge. Safeguarding, well-being, EAL are among currently trending areas of focus. Common CPD focus also includes student well-being, data security, students' voices, and technology. Some schools are also focusing on improving teacher skills and engaging students within the classroom. Educators are continuous learners. As schools continue to produce students who are lifelong learners, their teachers and staff should also be role models and be part of that learning journey. CPD also continues to help schools in aligning their teachers to their teaching and learning focus, initiatives, and also for accreditation's purposes. Aside from that, I'd like to go back to personalized or differentiated CPD because it also helps teachers to pursue particular interests that they have strength in, to strengthen more their skills, and also areas that they need to improve on.
Okay, thank you. Nalini, coming back over to you now to ask, what budgets do international schools have for CPD? Is this a centralised budget or does it tend to be per department?
There's no easy answer here because there is no one size fits all. Some schools prioritize their PD budget, for others it's a nice addition. There are also multiple ways of the budget being assigned or requested, which can range from departmental or even individual autonomy, right through to, I've spoken to some schools where the owner perhaps wants to sign off on each purchase individually. Quite hard going. But typically there is a whole school CPD budget. That's fairly normal. And that's usually in line with the school's goals, initiatives, and accreditation preparation. And it would cover mandatory whole school courses like safeguarding, for example. And then typically we would also see, excuse me, an allocated budget per department and possibly an individually allocated budget as well. Now, how those are spent depends on school operations. Some use aspiration and skills mapping of their teachers to decide on how budgets are allocated. Others leave it entirely up to the individual to use as they best see fit. Others link it perhaps to an appraisal system. And of course, as Janelle was mentioning earlier, with regards to school groups, as you would expect, groups often have a centralized budget for much of their CPD too.
Okay, thank you. We had a question asking, what is the current level of interest in IQTS with international school leaders? So Janelle, if you could take and give some thoughts on that point, please.
Sure. So I have conversations about IQTS with my colleagues, and I feel that IQTS interest, according to our conversations, varies according to our regions. For Southeast Asia, for instance, even pre-pandemic, there were many countries in Southeast Asia where, in order to protect locals' jobs, they implemented strict procedures around visa processing of teachers. So even before IQTF, for example, in Singapore, the Singapore government launched a program which some international schools participated in to upskill local teachers. Now with IQTS, with the DEIJ push, and for some countries, the challenge of recruiting expatriate teachers, schools are sponsoring or some encouraging local teachers and expatriate teachers who are not in the education fields to get their IPG-CE and qualify for IQTS. Some schools acknowledge that there's still some pushback from parents because their idea of quality education is having Western teachers. But schools also mention that once they release or advertise their teachers' qualifications or they qualify for IQTS, it helped. In the Middle East, I'm told that rather than with schools, interests are being led by applicants rather than the other way around. And for Europe, this doesn't appear to be an area of interest at all. In fact, IQTS, as I was told, hasn't been mentioned in my colleagues' interviews there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the staff recruitment and CPD questions. So to follow on, we're going to stay on the topic of recruitment, but this time to look at student recruitment and enrolment. So over to you, Chloe.
Thanks, Emma. So Abhishek, hopefully we'll be able to go through this question with you. So what is the biggest barrier for schools in adopting baseline assessments?
Sure, thank you, Chloe, and sorry for the earlier glitch.
No problem.
So most schools we have interviewed stated that they use some kind of baseline assessment, but barriers to using recognized assessment includes cost and cross-curricular or language capabilities. Like these were the major barriers that we got in our survey with the schools.
Great.
Sure, thank you.
And Janelle, what advice would you give in terms of what the UK higher education sector should do from a marketing and recruitment perspective to further engage with the international schools?
Face-to-face visits still make a huge difference because there's still that personal approach and time to speak to students and their families about logistics of visas, living arrangement, costs. It's not just course content related. Aside from that, on marketing, it will also be helpful to have information about the benefits of living in the UK for students, from education, the experience, and even personal experience to gain there. For instance, in Canada, higher education sector, they market how it's a pathway for migration, or in New Zealand and in Australia, they're marketing how it is less expensive to study there compared to other Western countries.
That's great, thank you. We've been asked what the marketing trends in student recruitment are. So Nalini, I wondered if you might be able to answer this one for us.
Yeah, certainly on the basis of the conversations that we've had with admissions and marketing heads in the last academic year, we're seeing a lot more emphasis being placed on student welfare and contentedness, as well as life skills to prepare students for life after education. Those people that we're interviewing are telling us that parents are actually far more concerned with whether their child will be happy at school these days, rather than the academics. That's not to say academics aren't important, it's just that they are taken almost as a given, that and then it's looking at the happiness and well-being more. I think it's worth noting that although there are some really quite long established international schools, the majority are, as most of us will know, much more recently opened. And so we're starting to see alumni come through and enter the world of employment and perhaps even start their own families. So tied into this, we're now starting to see increased engagement with student alumni as a source of student recruitment. And we're also seeing increased marketing on social media and an increasing number of open days. In some countries, schools are changing the marketing strategy to be a little bit more welcoming of the local community, particularly post-COVID. And we've spoken to a number of schools this year championing their local communities, which has then in turn been reflected in their inquiry and enrolment numbers. It's quite interesting.
That's brilliant, thank you. Oh, that ends that little section. Sorry, that was quite a short one compared to the one before. So over to Em now, who's going to look at more regional specific questions.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so we had a number of questions relating to certain regions, as Chloe's mentioned. So again, we're going to cover as many of those for you as we can now. First one for Nalini. So maybe you can confirm for us the question that was asked. Do the majority of schools in KSA follow UK or US curriculum?
Yeah, this is a nice, easy one. And I looked up the figures. It's 57% of international schools in Saudi follow a US curriculum, and 27% of international schools in Saudi follow a UK curriculum. So the majority is obviously leaning more towards the US curriculum. That does make it slightly different to perhaps what you might have expected as the rest of the Gulf states. The UK curriculum is definitely more prevalent.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. A question came in asking which regions are experiencing high market growth for international schools at the moment, and is accreditation growing at the same pace? So Janelle, I wonder if you could answer that one for us.
That's an interesting question. And based on our data, the fastest rate of growth of school numbers since January 2022 has been in Africa, where the number of schools has grown by about 3%. In all regions except Oceania, growth of the number of accredited schools was significantly higher than growth of the number of all schools. Worldwide, the number of accredited schools grew by around 7%, while the number of all schools showed little growth. On the importance of accreditation, this also stems from many families seeing accredited schools as more stable or with better offer compared to schools who are not accredited. Just to add, in Indonesia, I just had conversation with school heads there. This is not yet official, but I heard that the MOE in Indonesia will make SPK accreditation stricter with a criteria that to be considered an SPK school, there should be an international accreditation. This is because there are schools in the country that are claiming to be international schools, but not truly international, but doesn't really deliver international education when it comes to curriculum.
Thanks. And Nalini, could you update us on what MENA markets are showing the most growth and development post-COVID, please?
Yeah, in percentage terms, the largest change was actually in Morocco, where school numbers increased by more than 9%. But the actual numbers are fairly small. We're talking about going from 32 schools to 35. Among the countries of more typical interest, the only real significant change actually was in Qatar, where school numbers increased by almost 4%. However, I'll caveat that with, firstly, we're seeing growth with a number of new international schools planned in Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Bahrain, but also that here we're looking at growth of schools themselves as buildings, establishments, not necessarily reflective of enrolment numbers, which are growing in a number of countries too.
Thanks. And how has the growth of international schools market changed in the past 12 months? So Pia, wonder if you could answer that one for us.
So I think the question or my answers are going to be really closely tied to what Janelle has already discussed earlier, because in many countries, there has been little change in school numbers since January 2022. Notable exceptions include mainland China and Hong Kong, where school numbers have fallen by about 4% and 3% respectively between July 2022 and May 2023. So Janelle mentioned earlier that regionally, it's Africa that's seeing the highest growth in school numbers. And at a sub-regional level, the highest growth in school numbers that we're seeing was in Southern Africa. And most of the growth here was in the country, South Africa. In East Asia and Southeast Asia, school numbers fell by around 1.3%, while in the Middle East, they went up by almost 1%.
And while you are in the hot seat for us there, Pia, you may not be surprised to know that we've had a lot of questions relating to China specifically. So I wonder if we could pick your brains and you could share your expertise with a few on a few of the next questions. So a number of clients would like to find out more about the data privacy laws in China. So what are the current requirements for transferring data across borders?
So thank you for that, Emma. And to whoever asked that question, thank you, because I love talking about China regulations. So just so we're all on the same page, China's new data privacy law came into effect in November 2021. It's called the PIPL, or the Personal Information Protection Law. If you are based in the UK, which I think many of you are, you would probably be familiar with the Data Protection Act 2018 or the GDPR, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation. Now, China's PIPL is very similar to these, but it's not exactly the same. Now, the specific requirements of PIPL, including around cross-border data transfers, these, strictly speaking, these fall outside the remit of ISC Research, but their impact on international schools, which I believe there's a separate question for, that one we can answer. For anyone who's interested in the details of PIPL, however, we would be more than happy to point you to the direction of articles and guidance notes by legal practitioners, if that's needed to get you started.
Brilliant, thank you. And yes, sticking with the PIPL data laws then, we had a couple of clients asking how they affect international schools doing international assessments. Please.
So for this question, I actually caught up with a few school leaders that head up their school's PIPL compliance efforts. And there were two key areas of impact that came up. So the first is having to sign written agreements with any and all companies that they work with, both inside and outside of China, about how they are meant to process data in accordance with the PIPL. Now, the schools are saying that, thankfully, because these other companies that they work with are based in jurisdictions with existing data privacy laws, getting them to sign these agreements have been relatively without issue. So that's the first area of impact. The second area of impact is having to obtain separate consent from students or their parents, specifically to allow the schools to transfer their data to the examination boards for assessment purposes. So one of the challenges that schools mentioned is, around the withdrawal of consent. So what are they supposed to do if the students or the parents say, I would like to, revoke the consent that I've previously given? Schools are saying that they don't anticipate this to happen often because they're going to need, they're going to need the students to give consent so that they can grade their papers. But schools do need clear procedures and guidelines just in case this happens.
Okay, thank you. And can you please provide some information on China's regulations on basic education updates?
So I don't want to turn this into the Great Big China webinar. So I would like to just signpost for everyone that we will be releasing a market intelligence summary report for China later this academic year. But some of the key regulatory changes included in that report, we're going to give like a spoiler now. These include those relating to the end of China's zero COVID policy. So for example, China is now processing these applications for dependents and for tourists. Then there's also the issue of international schools having to change their legal names, which are usually different from, the trading names or the names that we see on their websites. The other issue is the cap or the limit on private school enrollment, which some local authorities have started to implement, including in Shanghai. And finally, there's also the very recent need to switch from a training school license, which some well-known international high schools have, to a private high school license in order for them to continue operating. So those are just some of the things we're signposting, but again, we will be releasing the market intelligence summary report for China later this year.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And how has recent government policy impacted student numbers and growth in China and Hong Kong?
So I imagine, Emma, by like recent government policy, we're talking about, zero COVID, Hong Kong's national security law, China's double reduction policy, and all the other regulatory changes that I had mentioned earlier. And generally, these regulations have impacted the number of traditional, often Western, expatriates in mainland China and Hong Kong. So international school populations are becoming more local. But we at ISC Research recognize that local is a very heterogeneous group anyway. So aside from this, there's also been increased movement of students between international schools. Now, what do we mean by that? Now, let's take China as an example. So in China, we've got the Chinese private schools or the bilingual schools that can admit Chinese passport holders. But then you also have the schools for the children of foreign nationals, for which you need a foreign passport. Now, school leaders are saying that because of the tightening of regulations for the bilingual schools, it's become more apparent to families the difference between these two schools. So some of the students, some of the families, maybe they have a foreign passport, but maybe the bilingual school was closer to their house, maybe the fees were more, within their budget. But because of the tightening of regulations for the bilingual schools, they're now moving to the schools for the children of foreign nationals so they can continue to have unfettered access to foreign curricula and materials, which is quite, and under a big question mark for some bilingual schools at least.
Okay, well, thank you, Pia. Lots of really great information on China specifically there. So we're going to give you a breather now, you will be pleased to know. And Nalini, we'll come back to you if we can. If you could give some thoughts on the plans for updated market intelligence for the Americas, Europe and Africa, please.
Yeah, so there are new reports for some select countries of interest in Western Europe that will be available by summer. If you're looking for perhaps a broader look at that market, we do have a Europe regional report, which will be available at the same time. We've also got a number of commercial intelligence reports, which give kind of a condensed, but all the essential research into the international schools market in Brazil, Mexico and Nigeria. And the market-specific report for Egypt is already available in terms of Africa too.
Thank you. Janelle, would you be able to give some insight on the current appetite for British online schooling in Southeast Asia, please?
Sure. It's definitely growing, which is very interesting because pre-pandemic, it is quite unheard of, but the pandemic streamlined everything. In fact, King's Inter-High will be launching a new timetable for APAC with Southeast Asia as the target market. Still, some of the school leaders in Southeast Asia that I have spoken to believe that Asians would still prefer the face-to-face schooling, but with the independence in secondary years and the options and flexibility in online schooling, plus the more affordable fees, there may be some parents who would go the online learning route. I also heard from my colleague who interviewed online schools that they have been getting students coming from Asia and a notable number from Indonesia.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really interesting. Abhishek, I'm hoping that we can come to you now. We have had a question relating to the Brazilian market and what is happening with K-12 education there.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Emma, for that question. So in Brazil, many international school leaders feel that the local population does not understand the concept and benefit of international education well. But because of the recent dramatic changes that is happening in the political arena of the country towards globalization, some of these schools are predicting that there will be rise in international curricula and exams. There is much more demand for primary international school in the country. Hence, many international schools focus their development on campus expansion, teachers recruitment, facility, curriculum, etc. on this age phase, as an interest in international schooling tends to decline from grade 9. Portuguese language and literature and Brazilian social studies are compulsory in all the schools registered in the country, irrespective of their profit status or curriculum orientation, which creates pressure on core subjects and the breadth of other subjects that can be offered, as was noted earlier in the country. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you,
Sure.
Abhishek.
Thank you.
And a final question then on this area. So what issues are important to British international schools in Asia? And over to you, Janelle, for this last one.
We have a recruitment session. I mean, we have a recruitment category in this webinar, and it's just apt because recruitment issues is one of the most important issues for British schools in Asia. For Southeast Asia, for instance, school leaders in most countries talk about retaining and recruiting teachers. So many are very interested to know about teacher salaries and benefits or best practices in recruiting and retaining teachers. There are also some small and mid-market international schools in Southeast Asia who mentioned that when it comes to teachers recruitment companies, they hope that there are packages that will cater to their type of schools. Still on recruitment in South Asia's Pakistan, schools are finding it difficult to recruit expatriate teachers due to uncertainty in taxation policies and fluctuating Pakistani currency, hampering the financial planning of the staff. With the growth of numbers of international schools in Southeast Asia, schools are also talking about evaluating program offerings, with some deciding to offer more offerings other than the UK curriculum in order to give families choices aside from program offerings. Facilities, teaching and learning trends, and also PDs are also issues being discussed. The competition is getting tougher, so these are important issues that are also important to their prospective parents. Having said that, recruitment of students is another important topic. In Malaysia, for instance, there are many schools who attend recruitment fairs overseas, especially in Asian countries like South Korea, Hong Kong, and Japan. This is because most of the expatriate numbers in schools, they are under the education visa in Malaysia. So this is an important issue with some schools engaging with external students recruitment agencies. In the Middle East, schools in some countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman are facing resourcing challenges as there are limited education suppliers in the country, and quality is also an issue for local procurement.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you to all of you for your input on those really key regions. So we are going to head back over to you now then, Chloe, for a part on EdTech.
Thanks, Emma. So first question on EdTech, how important is technology in the classroom? Pia, I hope you have had enough of a rest now, so maybe you could take this one for us.
Of course, Chloe. So how important is technology in classrooms? The short answer is it's hugely important. But after all the emergency online learning measures that schools have had to put in place during the pandemic, many schools are looking to be more intentional about what technology they use and when they use it. So now schools are saying, it's using technology to support or to complement learning, teaching, and assessment, instead of using technology for its own sake or using it because their hands are tied or something.
Great, thanks, Pia. And Abhishek, could you provide some thoughts on what the biggest challenge for international schools is that EdTech could help solve?
Sure. As per the school leaders, there are 4 major areas where EdTech could help international schools. So I will divide them into 4 areas that I have got as a response. So the first one is convenience of professional development for teachers and to support them analyzing students' data to impart personalized learning. Now, the second one is EdTech can help schools collaborate to enable pooling of teaching resources, particularly for educational needs that require extensive resourcing supplies. Third area, EdTech can also help to reduce cost and time delays by providing education materials virtually rather than importing them, which again takes a lot of time and money in terms of custom duties. Virtual content and interactive platform can make education more engaging and experiential for students. Finally, the fourth area where they see EdTech helping them is differentiation of EdTech tools that could cater to different types of learning would also be helpful for school. Now, this could also support classroom lessons when a child needs more support in understanding a particular lesson concepts. In that, these are 4 areas where it could be helpful.
That's great. That's really useful. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
A number of our clients have asked about the growth areas for hardware usage. And Nalini, I wondered if you could provide some input here.
Yeah, there are a lot of growth areas. Schools around the world have either equipped their classrooms with smart boards, or in some cases they want to. Some schools are already on their second generation of such boards and panels, with those that have been using them for some time reporting that they are now really an integral part of the student learning experience. So that was the number one growth area. There is an increased interest in providing tablets over laptops, perhaps due to their convenience. Not everybody's saying this, but we've certainly heard this a number of times. Now, most people will know that high school students typically would still use laptops, but tablets and crossover models are actually becoming more advanced. And so there's an anticipation that this might change there. So rather than just having primary using tablets and secondary laptops, we're actually seeing those crossovers coming more into the secondary age phases. One growth area that schools really need hardware for is around the use of immersive learning technologies in schools. So those who are exploring AR, VR, just various alternative reality, metaverse, etc. At the moment, this is often the preserve of real premium fee schools, but it certainly has the potential for an even greater impact at lower fee schools once they become more affordable. And again, in premium fee schools, there are increasingly facilities for recording studios, media suites, design labs, all of which are being installed to answer what is largely a student-led interest in various media, to enable them to communicate and to disseminate information for assessment, perhaps in alternative manners to what most of us are used to. So things like podcasts, webinars, TikTok, all kinds of things.
TikTok. What is TikTok?
I do not know.
Thank
Can't
you.
help you
No.
there.
Thanks, Nalini. So we've got a big question now coming up, as in it's a long question. So what are the biggest trends you are seeing regarding EdTech spend, and does this differ by market, taking into account content, devices, security or access? Pia, I wonder if you can tackle this one for us.
So I think this one about EdTech spend, the answers would closely mimic the ones that Nalini has mentioned earlier. So generally, we're seeing EdTech growth visible in international schools across teachers, CPD, learning management systems, and the increasing personalization of student learning and assessments. One area for growth that Nalini has mentioned and that I'm personally very excited about is the use of immersive learning technologies like VR and AR, as well as gamification or esports even, to make education more engaging, particularly for primary age students. Another area is online safeguarding, as this continues to be a big concern for schools that can find it quite challenging to keep pace with the many developments in this area. So overall, there's a whole spectrum of access and devices. And from our conversations with school leaders, the trends are less geographically defined and more dependent on the school's viewpoint.
Lovely, that's great, thank you. We've also been asked what the EdTech growth opportunities are currently within Southeast Asia. So Janelle, I wonder if you could take this one for us.
Sure, and it's quite similar to what my colleagues have mentioned, Nalini, Abhishek, and Pia. In Southeast Asia, investments in technology have been brought up by a number of school heads in different countries. Most of these countries mention technology investments in innovation and robotics. For instance, in Singapore, there are some investing in fabrication labs. An example is SingEd Global Schoolhouse, which has partnered with Fab Foundation for the establishment of fabrication labs at SingEd-owned schools, and international schools under SingEd include Invictus International School and the Perth School Singapore. In Malaysia, technology is part of many schools' focus. Some of these include management and admission platforms, as well as safeguarding. In Cambodia, technology focus when it comes to EdTech is in the area of STEM, which involve robotics and design and technology.
Interesting, thank you. Abhishek, would you be able to give us your thoughts on which school subjects will benefit most from increased digital spending in 2023?
Sure, I can add that. So common subjects include well-being, EL, English as an additional language, maths, and artificial intelligence. However, African schools and many other schools which are highly inclined towards imparting technological skills see digital spending useful for promoting STEM subjects, coding, robotics, and 21st century skills. But in general, if I have to talk about this question, so schools share that digital spending will help students in most subjects and teachers in evaluating students' progress in different topics and subjects. Sure.
Lovely, thanks Abhishek.
Sure.
And then the final question in the EdTech section covers the extremely hot topic of artificial intelligence. Our clients would like to know what the schools are saying about it and would like an insight into the teachers' views on the use of AI in their schools. So Janelle, I wondered if you could respond on this one for us.
This is a hot topic indeed, and I've been hearing about this from a lot of schools. So there are two main differing opinions on AI, such as ChatGPT at the moment. There are those who are embracing it wholeheartedly and are looking at ways to upskill teachers and educate students on how responsible and appropriate use of AI within their work. An example is Southeast Asia, Singapore, whose government is very supportive on ChatGPT tools. So schools are also making sure to be able to use this to their advantages in their schools and in the education of their children. However, they also see that although it is powerful, certain limitations should be set if it hinders critical thinking and integrity of their students. Some schools in my colleagues' regions also see AI useful to reduce the workload of teachers in performing manual and mundane tasks, leaving teachers more time to focus on core development. For East Asia, schools are generally excited about AI and are keen to learn more about how it can be used in their schools. Going back to privacy, there are concerns around privacy and data security. So some schools globally have adopted policies focused on promoting responsible usage of technology, including AI for educational purposes. Schools have also installed multiple layers of firewalls to avoid any data breach and security issues. There are also those with a wait-and-see approach. Some are thinking that teacher training of advanced tech tools will be a challenge considering their experience on conventional technologies. For some, it will also depend on what AI is being used for. If it's to automate administrative tasks or streamline the keeping and sharing of records, then AI is very much welcome. But if it's to install a robot teacher in every classroom, then teachers unsurprisingly have reservations. School leaders have shared the need to properly market any sort of tech innovation for teachers because they may feel like these threaten their livelihood.
That's great, thank you. And thank you all for your feedback on those EdTech questions. So we're drawing near to the end of the session now. But before we close, Nalini is going to give us a little update on the market developments that will affect the second half of 2023. So over to you, Nalini.
Thanks, Chloe. Well, just a few highlights really on what we're anticipating in the global international schools market within the coming 6 months. So firstly, to India, we're seeing a significant increase in collaboration with foreign universities here, which might well attract more local students who want to progress to these universities. So along with population growth and an increasing middle class, all signs here indicate that there will be growth in international schools in India. In China, we'll have the first academic year with the borders fully open. And we're likely to see this impact both teacher recruitment and retention in China, as well as the overall number of foreigners in China. We're also anticipating increased inquiries and enrollments of Chinese students in international schools abroad, which is an interesting one. In Southeast Asia, there is continued growth, especially in emerging countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. Singapore and Thailand will continue to be popular. Singapore is obviously a huge financial hub, and Thailand gives some high quality options, in fact, a huge amount of high quality options at a lower fee point. So it's incredibly popular for that reason. Like India, we're also seeing an increase of foreign university satellites in Southeast Asia. So again, that's got the potential to positively impact international school enrollment. In the Middle East, things are incredibly buoyant in the market here at the moment. Expats are flooding in on a daily basis into the Gulf states, with the UAE booming. Qatar is currently still enjoying the remnants of the success of the recent World Cup. In Saudi Arabia, the PIF is investing really heavily in making the city attractive to foreign investment and to expatriates, and there are a number of new international schools in the pipeline. In Brazil, the new government is already pushing for an elevation of education standards. A number of school groups are currently looking to acquire schools in the country, so it seems likely there will be something to watch there, particularly if we see reform around the national curriculum. And we're continuing to see branch campuses for UK and US and occasionally Australian independent schools and international school groups open or in the planning phases around the world. So I think we've got in excess of 300 future schools on our database at the moment. So lots going on, plenty of growth.
Lots going on indeed. Thank you, Nalini. Well, that brings us to the end of the webinar today. Now, obviously, it's been jam-packed with questions, so we haven't had the chance to answer any questions that may have been posed during the webinar. So they will be passed over to Chloe and I, and we will get back to you on those as soon as we possibly can. Chloe and I would like to say a big thank you to our fabulous field researchers for sharing their thoughts, time and knowledge on the market. And once again, a huge thank you to those of you that have joined and have submitted questions. We truly hope that you have found the session to be valuable. And as mentioned at the beginning, if we didn't get to your question, then we will follow up with you directly with more feedback. If you have any other questions at all, then please do get in touch and we'll be happy to help as always. And you can reach us on the email address isc-clientservices@iscresearch.com or find all of our contact details under the support tab on the outreach portal. So from all of us here at ISC, thank you and bye for now.
Bye.